Hello, lovely people. Welcome back. My name is Alethea Thomas, for those of you who haven't been on this channel before. I am primarily a booktuber. I also do vlogs on occasion. I haven't done very many, to be perfectly honest. I find it's difficult to use some of my other footage to actually make vlogs, and it's kind of hard for me to plan vlogs too. So if anyone knows of any good advice for planning out vlogs, I'm all ears and welcome to that. And also if there's maybe any aspects of my life you might like to see, if you'd be interested in that, I'm happy to film things. Pretty much as long as they don't involve my kids, because I don't want my kids involved in YouTube too much yet. I will let them decide when they're a little older, and probably not till they're early teenagers, to be perfectly honest, because I don't think I want my kids anywhere near social media for a good long while. So today I am doing a review of The Picture of Dorian Gray. In this spooky month of October, I decided to read a few classic novels that are horror novels, and The Picture of Dorian Gray being the first one because it was so short. Did not take very long for me to get through. And then the next classic that I will be doing, and I'm about 100 pages in right now, is Dracula. So I'm also very excited about this one. We will go through the introduction to the text. We will go over characters, the plot of the story, and then my thoughts about the book, and then that will be the review. So let's go ahead and get started with an introduction to the book. The Picture of Dorian Gray is a late Victorian Gothic novel written by Oscar Wilde. Wilde was an Irish poet and a playwright primarily. The Picture of Dorian Gray was his only novel, and Wilde published the story in 1890. His publisher was afraid that the work was too indecent, and he cut 500 words from the novel without Wilde's knowledge. The novel was met with much criticism for its time, and it was called immoral, and parts of the manuscript were cited in court during the trial against Wilde for alleged acts of gross indecency with other male persons. And Wilde was sent to prison for 2 years. And so that's kind of the backdrop behind the book itself. And Wilde's time, homosexuality was very frowned upon. It was considered indecent, and people went to jail for it. And I think they actually were killed for it too, a lot of times. If not through the court systems, then through civil justice, perhaps? I don't know, but it was very wrong. Totally wrong. Very different time from our own today. So let's start with the characters of the book. So Dorian Gray is our titular character. Dorian begins the novel as an innocent youth, and over time he becomes corrupted. He becomes acquainted with the artist Basil Hallward and Lord Henry Wotton, and they both influence his life. Dorian becomes enamored with art, music, plays, and all things beautiful. He behaves like a foppish English gentleman of the late Victorian period, with really nothing better to do than to sit around with other gentlemen just like himself and philosophize on all aspects of mankind, art, beauty, philosophy, that kind of thing. Next is Basil Hallward. He's the artist that paints the picture of Dorian Gray. He is enamored and inspired by Dorian's goodness, his youth, and beauty. And when he paints the picture, he admits to putting a part of himself into the painting. He says to the Lord Henry Wotton, explains to him near the beginning of the book that I have put too much of myself into this painting. And I think that's where the magic kind of comes from. But we'll get to that in just a second. So he tells both Lord Henry, and then he also tells Dorian this later on in the book, that he has put a piece of himself, or he put too much of himself into the painting. Basil is interested in Dorian because of his goodness and his youth and his beauty, and he wants Dorian to continue to be a good person. In this scenario, you could say that Basil is almost like the angel on one shoulder, on Dorian's shoulder. The next character that's important is Lord Henry Wotton. He is an English gentleman, and he lives a life of leisure and self-indulgent hedonism. He shares his personal philosophy with Dorian, and he kind of sets Dorian down the path of his eventual downfall. He is an indifferent person who uses wit to influence, mislead, and impress others. He does not care about the consequences of his actions whatsoever. And I think in this scenario, you could think of Lord Henry as the devil on Dorian's other shoulder. So the two influences, the devil and the angel. That's what I got from them anyway. So I think that they're the three most critical characters to know about. There are other characters in the book too. Probably the most notable one, well, maybe two most notable are the girl that Dorian does fall in love with kind of near the beginning of the book, and her name is Sybil Vane. And then she has a brother who, I think his first name is John, but his last name is also Vane, so Mr. Vane as well. And if you read the book, you find out a bit more about Sybil and her brother, and then of course what happens to poor Sybil, but we'll get to that in just a second. So the plot. The book begins with Lord Henry visiting Basil at his home, and they discuss Basil's latest obsession, and that's Dorian Gray. Basil is inspired to make a great painting and is having Dorian come and sit for him. And then Lord Henry and Dorian meet, and this sets off, a relationship between all three of the characters that continues throughout the whole book. So Basil shows Dorian the painting of Dorian Gray, and Dorian realizes that he is beautiful and that he's never really considered himself beautiful, and that he never wants to bear the burden of age or, decay or any kind of negative influence. He never wants to grow old. So he makes a wish, and he wishes that he should not age and that the portrait would bear all his burden of age and morality. And the wish comes true. I think that the reason the wish came true is because both that Basil put a part of himself into the painting, and then Dorian made the wish. So I think the two of those things together made the magic happen. So Dorian becomes inspired by the philosophy of Lord Henry, and he begins to emulate him. And this has devastating results. Dorian falls in love with the actress named Sybil Vane, but their relationship ends in tragedy, and Dorian does not take responsibility. He comes to realize that the painting changes after Sybil's death, and what this means for him. He would be young forever, and he would never grow old and decrepit. There is a book that Dorian receives from Lord Henry that fuels his hedonistic life further. The name of the book is really not mentioned in the novel, but during the trials, Oscar Wilde said that the book was a French novel called A Rebours. I'll spell it down here. And that means against nature. And very, very, very briefly, it's a text about asceticism, and beauty and hedonism and that kind of thing. And you can find it still. It's on Goodreads, and then if you look it up in Wikipedia, you can find out more about it if you'd like to. Through Lord Henry's influence, Dorian slowly becomes more hedonistic. He's selfish. He becomes way more libertine, and to the point where he is regularly visiting prostitutes. There's drug use in the book, and then murders? Multiple murders? Yeah, multiple murders, I think, occur. I think maybe two occur. Anyway, regardless. Dorian in kind of a fit of insanity, I want to say, because all of this stuff happens to him. He ends up going down this horribly sinful path, and he comes to nearing the end, and this is 20 years, I think, that all of this has gone on. And then he decides he wants to be good. And I don't think there's any turning back because I think it's the influence of, not the influence of, I think it's because he has the thought that he's going to be living forever because the picture will continue to house what happens to his soul and age. I think he thinks he might be immortal and that he'll continue to live on a very long existence. So he thinks he could probably make up for all the evil things he's done, which is basically insane at this point because he has done so many awful, cruel things to so many people at this point. The novel ends with him wanting to be good again, but he just cannot possibly be good because he's going to try to destroy what he thinks is the thing of evil. And you'll see how it works out if you read the rest of the book, because I don't want to give it away. Yeah, I don't want to give it away because it's kind of an interesting idea. Oscar Wilde's ending. Not my favorite ending of any book ever, but makes sense if you kind of sit down and think about it a little bit. I will now go on to my thoughts on this book. I really enjoyed it. I think Oscar Wilde's writing style is so great. This book was written in 1890, so it was very accessible to read. The text was very modern. I think even possibly for its time, it was very modern. I did not have difficulty keeping up with this text. It was very easy to read, so I think this is a very accessible work. I'd known the story of Dorian Gray for a long time, and I honestly couldn't tell you where I originally heard it from. I may have read this in high school, but I don't really remember. It's been a while, and I sort of forgot about it. I remembered that the character of Dorian Gray was in the movie The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and the actor who played Dorian Gray was pretty cute. I remember that much. And I think out of all the adaptations of Dorian Gray, I liked that one in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen the most because he seemed like charismatic, the most grown-up man. You know, he had learned his lesson, I suppose, about being awful to people, but he was a rather good guy. This would have been the Dorian that survived and actually did good. You know, the ending of The Picture of Dorian Gray didn't happen like the book. So that's that version of him. The novel itself was really cool. I enjoyed digging into kind of the finer details of it. And I particularly like the part where Dorian is kind of occupying his time with studying other things, because this book goes on, I mentioned earlier, for about 20 years. And there were times where he would go off and hide himself from society for a little bit and then come back into society. And I think that might have been like a strategy to kind of trick people into thinking like, oh, he's not getting older. You know, why is he not getting older? So kind of to distract them from that, perhaps. But he would study other things. And one of the things he was studying was the jewelry and jeweled clothing worn by kings and queens of old. And the detail that Oscar Wilde had, you know, in talking about that was really quite fascinating. I think that was maybe partially influenced by his theatrical background a bit, but it was really, really cool. The descriptions in the book are really very wonderful. Just the scenes, the descriptions of the backdrops of the scenes, the clothing on the characters, all kinds of nature that he spoke about. Just, it was beautiful writing from Oscar Wilde there. Really enjoyed that stuff a lot. The novel covers a lot of aesthetic philosophy, and there's just so much discussion in it about beauty and art. There is this idea kind of floated throughout the book that beauty must essentially be good, and ugliness is essentially bad and sinful and associated with bad, horrible things. And I don't think, and of course, we know that's not necessarily true, but I think for the aesthetic person, aestheticism almost demands that beauty be good. I may be wrong about this. Let me know if I'm wrong about that. I don't know that much about asceticism, to be perfectly honest. There's also a lot of philosophy in the book and the nature of man, the nature of sin. They talk about hedonism and morality. Really, this book was a criticism of stuffy Victorian lifestyles during that time, and perhaps how man should go back to being more like his natural self. So, I think this book is pretty deep without going too far down the philosophic rabbit hole. I think that the average reader will be able to pick this up and grasp the concepts without knowing too much. So again, I think that, because of the language, because of the ideas in it, because the philosophy and the ideas are just not too in-depth, it's just kind of skimming the surface of these things, but it does it in a way that's kind of very rich and appealing and makes you want to kind of learn more about it. So I just think that because of all of that, this book is an extremely accessible classic for anybody to pick up. So I enjoyed it immensely. I think it was just so well written. I'm not probably going to jump up and want to read it again in like a really long time, maybe when I'm a bit older. So I think that for Goodreads, I went ahead and gave it 4 stars because it's a really, really solid book. But in my review, I stipulated that if I could do 4.5 stars, I would do 4.5 stars. It's not a perfect book. It is a little clunky in some places. I feel like Dorian's character is just a little bit too easily molded into what Lord Henry wants. Dorian does question himself a little bit throughout the book, but he always ultimately falls under the influence of Lord Henry, and it's almost like he wants to just take the easy way out and not really think for himself, just kind of do what he naturally wants, which, is fine, but for this book, that character having to do what he naturally wanted to do, and in that Victorian era, would have been seen as just sinful and hedonistic and terrible. But I think that's it. I think that it was just so wonderful. If you haven't read The Picture of Dorian Gray, watch one of the movies, pick up the book. It's fantastic. It's a great read. The horror level is actually very minimal. It's not scary. For our times, it is not a scary book whatsoever. So, just a very accessible Gothic-esque, Victorian Gothic literature. And that's it for Dorian Gray, so go read it. I said earlier, I am currently working on Bram Stoker, Dracula. I made a little mistake when I picked up my next book. So what I did was I got done with Dorian Gray, and I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and pick up Murakami and start reading A Wild Sheep Chase by Haruki Murakami. And I got like a couple pages in, and I sat that one down real quick just to get up and go do something. And then I came back, and I looked over at my to-be-read cart that I've got over by my bed, and, Bram Stoker's Dracula was sitting there. And so I picked it up. I was like, oh, let me flip through the first couple of pages of this and see how it looks. I read the first paragraph, the very first paragraph, and it hooked me so hard I couldn't put it down. And I have sped through 100 pages of this thing in a day and a half. And that's really fast for me. I realize that there are lots of people out there that can just whip through 100 pages like nobody's business. But for me to actually like sit down and make the time to read it, no matter what else is going on, that's when a book I know really has its claws in me. So, Dracula, my love, you will have me forever, and I will read your book, and I know that I will enjoy you thoroughly, because I am so enjoying this thoroughly. And I think that when I finish reading the book before October is out, I will also watch Bram Stoker's Dracula again, the movie. Was it Coppola? Oh yeah, Francis Ford Coppola directed that movie, so no wonder I love it so much. I love pretty much all Coppola movies. And then I may go ahead and watch Interview with the Vampire again, Anne Rice's classic, because I just absolutely love Anne Rice's books. The Interview with the Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, I think I read also. And I thought they were all really wonderful books when I was, I was a teenager and then into my early 20s, I think, reading those. And I couldn't get enough. I'm a vampire girl. I'm sorry. I just love it. It's the red hair. What can I say? So anyway, working on vampires, and then as soon as Dracula is done and I watch the movies, I may decide to pick up another Victorian Gothic-y type novel. I'm kind of interested in reading Jane Eyre. There has been something has made me want to really try and sit down and read Jane Eyre. I've never read it. I don't think I've really read any of the Bronte sisters, to be perfectly honest. So I'm really quite interested in Jane Eyre, and I heard that not only is it a very romantic story, but there's also a mystery. So, I mean, it could be really good for this time of year as well. I still want to read A Room with a View really badly. So what I might do is, like, right after this Bram Stoker's Dracula, I might just go ahead and pick that one up again. I'm kind of in a classics mood right now. So we'll see. Haruki Murakami might end up at the end of this month. But so far, October is being pretty good. The weather's getting cooler, and I'm much happier because I can actually not be sweating all day long. So anyway, that will be it for the broadcast. Thank you so much again for joining me. If you are interested at all in any of this content, please let me know. Also, I am on Goodreads. You can follow me on Goodreads. I am at goodreads.com/Alethea, Alethea, Thomas, Thomas. And that's also down below in the description. And I think that's about it. So anyway, enjoy your October. I hope that you guys are reading some really wonderful spooky books. And we will see you very soon. Bye.